Last night my son called. His voice was cold. He told me the building on Main Street and the trust his father built had already been signed over, that he was getting married in the morning, and that I should not make any of this harder than it needed to be. Then he said one word: goodbye. I sat in the dark, holding the phone, feeling like 40 years of my life had been sold off in a language I never agreed to speak. But he forgot one small thing, and that one thing would undo everything he thought he had won. It was almost midnight when the phone rang. I was standing at the kitchen counter, folding a dish towel the way I have folded 10,000 dish towels in this house, when I heard it buzz against the wood. I did not hurry. Calls that come at that hour are never good news, and I already carried that heaviness in my chest, the kind that builds slowly over months, and finally finds a way to speak. It was Wes. There was no hello, no pause to let me catch up. He said he was getting married in the morning. He said the building and the trust were handled, that he had taken care of everything, that I should rest and not complicate it. And then there was nothing, not even the click of a line going dead, just silence, and the small, dark rectangle of the screen looking back at me. Outside, the rain kept up its patient work against the glass. It was the soft, late September rain we get in the Monadnock Hills, the kind that never quite commits to a storm, just lingers and soaks into everything until you are damp without remembering when it started. I sat down at the kitchen table without deciding to. My knees simply folded. The old chair creaked under me the way it used to creak under Walter when he leaned back after supper and rubbed his temples with both thumbs. I did not cry. Something in me went still, instead, like fog settling over a field, wrapping every thought in a blanket too heavy to lift. The house was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator, and that hum had been part of this kitchen for more than 30 years. Walter wired the outlet for it himself, rather than pay the delivery men to do a job he could do in 20 minutes. I remembered him backing the truck up to the porch, proud and laughing, hollering at me to hold the screen door. This was our house. Every beam, every coat of paint, every crooked shelf in the pantry carried the print of his hands, and mine too. And once upon a time, Wes helped us press the flat stones into the front path when he was small enough to call me Mama and mean it like a prayer. Now he had called me once in the dark to say goodbye, the way you might return a coat you had borrowed and no longer wanted. I sat at that table a long time, tracing the grain of the wood with one finger, as though if I followed the line far enough I might find the part of myself I had misplaced somewhere in the last year. He said the building was signed over. He said the trust was handled. I could not remember signing anything that would let a son do that to his mother. But the truth, when I made myself look at it, was not so clean. These past months I had let him bring me papers. Small things, he said. Routine, he said. Updates to your father's accounts, a correction on the storefront leases, nothing you need to read closely. And I had signed. Not all at once. Here and there, a page at a time, because when your son sets a coffee down in front of you and gives you that half hug and smiles the way he smiled at 12 when he built a fort out of couch cushions, you trust him. You want to believe he is still that boy. But I was beginning to understand something colder now. Wes had not simply grown greedy in a weak moment. He had planned this patiently, the way his father used to plan a season of repairs before the first frost. And the part that hollowed me out was not the money. It was that he had not asked me to the wedding. He did not say I could not come. He simply left no room where I might have stood. Not in his new life. Not in that phone call. Not even in the way he spoke of the past, as if I were already a thing that had happened to him rather than a person still sitting in her own kitchen. I counted the rain against the window like a clock I could not turn off, and I asked the dark the only question that mattered. How does a woman hand her whole life away one page at a time and never hear it leaving? I did not sleep. I sat with the silence and held it the way you hold a cracked vase you are afraid to set down. In the morning, my son would stand up somewhere in a rented suit and promise himself to a stranger, and I would begin slowly to gather the pieces of what he had scattered. By the time the sky went gray, the rain had stopped, but the weight in my chest had not. I made coffee the way Walter liked it, 2 scoops slow pour, no sugar, and I drank it black at the window because there was something honest in the bitterness that suited the morning. Out in the yard, the sugar maple Walter planted, the autumn Wes was born, stood half-turned already, its top branches gone the color of a struck match. It used to blaze brighter. These days it looked tired, the way I felt, as if it too were waiting for someone to come along and tend it. The wedding was probably beginning somewhere across town. A small hall folding chairs in rows, Wes in the navy suit because he always hated the fuss of a tuxedo, and beside him a bride whose name I had only heard twice and could not hold on to. I sat at the counter and did not go. A little after 9, the side door opened without a knock, the way it only ever opens for one person. Ruth Danvers has lived 2 doors down for 26 years, and somewhere in the last decade she stopped being a neighbor and became something closer to a sister. She came in with a foil pan of cinnamon bread still warm from her oven and set it on the table, and then she looked at me the way she looks at a bruise you are trying to hide. Her eyes going slowly over my face. She asked careful and low if I had heard from Wes. I told her he had called. I told her he was married by now, that the Main Street building was in his name, that the trust was handled, and that he had told me nothing else. Ruth sat down slowly as if her spine had forgotten for a moment how to hold her up. For a while neither of us said anything. The clock over the stove did the talking. Then she asked whether it had anything to do with all those visits he made in the spring, the coffee he kept bringing by the folders he carried in the week. I twisted my ankle on the cellar stairs and spent 10 days on the couch with my foot up and a bottle of pills that made the afternoons go soft at the edges. I told her I did not remember anything I would have called suspicious. Just pages. Long typed pages he asked me to sign at the bottom while he pointed at the line and talked about the weather. I did not read them the way Walter would have made me read them. I trusted the hand that set them down. Ruth did not tell me I had been foolish. She only reached across the table and laid her warm palm over the back of my hand and said that Wes had been acting off for a while now, always coming and going, always glancing toward the windows when he thought no one was watching. She said she had told herself it was sweet a grown son looking after his widowed mother, and that now she was not so sure. Her words settled onto me like cold water. I got up and went down the hall to the tall cabinet where Walter and I had always kept the things that mattered, the deed and the trust binder and our marriage license, and 40 years of paper proof that we had been here and built something. I opened the red folder that held the important documents. It was empty. Where the pages should have been, there was a single sheet folded once in Wes's handwriting. It said, "Mom, stop worrying about the paperwork. I have taken care of all of it. Rest easy." I stood in the hallway holding that note like it might scorch through my fingers, and I felt the thing I had not let myself feel in the dark the night before. Not grief. Panic. Not the kind that screams. The quiet kind, the kind that closes a hand around your lungs and whispers that you have been erased a little at a time and did not notice until the space where you used to be was already filled by someone else. I told Ruth I needed to go to the bank. She said she would drive, and I did not argue. The clerk at the counter was young and kind and did not understand at first why the pleasant woman in front of her was gripping the edge of the counter so hard. I gave her my name and the old account numbers. She typed, and her small smile faded, and she said she would get the manager. He came out with the particular gentleness people use when they already know they are about to hurt you. He explained that the trust accounts had been placed under a new trustee some weeks ago, that Wes Hilliard was now shown as the acting trustee of record, and that my access to those accounts had been changed accordingly. He said he was not able to share the internal documents, but that the paperwork had been presented and accepted through the ordinary channels. I asked whether my son had done this. He looked at me for a moment and did not have to answer. Ruth drove me to the Registry of Deeds after that because I could not make myself go home yet. I stood at the public terminal while a patient woman pulled the records for the Main Street property, the building that had held Hilliard Hardware for 38 years, the building Walter had bought outright the year we paid off the last of the loan, and then being Walter quietly bought 2 more storefronts down the block and leased them out because he said a man should never own only one roof if he could help it. On the screen, the woman found what I was afraid of. A quitclaim deed recorded over the summer moving the hardware building out of the trust and into Wes's name alone. I did not weep in the registry. I waited until Ruth had me back in the car, and even then I did not make a sound. She handed me a tissue anyway. On the shelf at home there is a photograph of Walter in his work apron holding a hammer in one hand and a squirming Wes in the other, both of them mid-laugh. And all the way home I heard the thing Walter used to say to our son, and to me, and to anyone who would listen. Never sign your name to a thing you have not read to the bottom. He said it 1,000 times. He never once imagined I would need protection from the boy in that photograph. That night I did not sleep either. I lay on my back and watched the ceiling as though it might tell me what I had given away in the name of loving him. Whatever Wes had done, it was not a mistake. Mistakes are careless. This was careful. This was built plank by plank the way his father taught him to build, and I had handed him the nails. Before dawn, I gave up on sleep and went back to the cabinet as if the pages might have found their way home in the night. Still empty. I remembered Walter's old fireproof box under the guest bed behind the sewing machine I never learned to use, and I got down on my knees and dragged it out and peeled the little key from where it was taped to the bottom. Inside were old tax returns and warranty cards for appliances we no longer owned. No deed, no trust binder, nothing of the life we had documented so carefully in duplicate for 4 decades. Just the sense crawling up under my skin that this was not only theft, it was erasure. I went to Walter's desk in the corner of the front room. The roll top he refinished the winter his knees gave out and he could no longer take the stairs at the store. I opened the bottom drawer to look for anything, and under a stack of old utility bills my fingers found an envelope. Plain white. No red folder, no label, just sealed and waiting. I opened it slowly. Inside was a single sheet in Walter's tight upright hand, the writing I would know anywhere. It said, "If anything ever happens, if you feel lost, call Gordon Pruitt. He knows the structure. Trust him." I read it twice. Gordon Pruitt. It had been years since I had heard that name spoken aloud. Gordon had worked alongside Walter back when they were both younger men, something with estates and trusts and the careful arranging of what people leave behind. I had met him only a handful of times across the years, always courteous, always sharp behind his glasses. I did not know if he was still practicing. I did not know if he was still alive. But sitting there in the gray light, with my husband's handwriting in my lap, I felt something I had not felt since the phone rang. Not relief and not quite hope. Something quieter and steadier than either. Clarity. Wes had taken what was mine, and worse than that he had tried to take who I was. But Walter, careful to the last, had left me a map. And for the first time in that long and sleepless week, I understood that I was not finished. I was only beginning to read it. I called the number on the card I found tucked behind Walter's old church directory. A business card gone soft at the corners, Gordon Pruitt. And under his name, the small, careful letters that meant he had spent a lifetime with other people's estates. My heart knocked against my ribs in a way it had not in years while it rang. He answered on the 4th ring, a voice older than I remembered, but steady, and when I said my name, there was a pause, and then a warmth came into it. Joan. Walter's Joan. My goodness, it has been an age. I heard about Walter last winter, and I have thought of you more than once since. I swallowed hard and told him I needed his help privately, that something was very wrong. His tone changed, then softened and sharpened at the same time the way a man's voice does when he stops being polite and starts paying attention. He said not to say it over the phone. He gave me the name of a diner 2 towns over out past where the road thins into cornfields, and told me to bring anything I had left. Originals, copies, even scraps. Whatever had my name on it or Wes's. The diner sat at the edge of the old county highway where Alder Creek gives way to open land, and it had not changed since Walter and I used to stop there for pie on the long drive back from the lumber yard. Same cracked lot, same buzzing sign with one dead letter. I got there early and took the booth farthest from the windows. Gordon came in 15 minutes later in a gray blazer that looked slept in, moving slower than the man I remembered. But his eyes behind the glasses missed nothing. He spotted me at once, nodded, and slid into the seat across from mine. We did not waste time on "How are you?" I laid the manila envelope on the table between the sugar caddy and the paper placemats, and inside it were the notes I had written across 2 sleepless nights, the printout from the registry, the empty red folder, and the single line in Walter's hand that had sent me looking for him. Gordon read it all with slow, methodical hands, tapping his index finger against his thumb, the way he was thinking a habit so exactly like Walter's that my throat tightened watching it. When he finally looked up, his face had gone from surprise to something graver. He said this was no accident. He said whoever had done this understood the machinery. Then he asked me a question that mattered more than I knew. When Walter passed, did anyone sit you down and explain how the trust was structured? I told him no. I told him the house had been full of casseroles and grief, and I had signed whatever the lawyer at the time slid in front of me and understood almost none of it. Gordon nodded as though that was the answer he had feared. He took out a yellow legal pad and drew a simple box, and inside it, he wrote our 2 names, and he explained the thing that would become the ground I stood on for the rest of it. Walter and I years ago, with Gordon's own help, had put the house and the buildings and the accounts into a living trust, a revocable one. He underlined the word twice. Revocable means it can be undone. While both of us were living, either of us could change it or unwind it entirely because it was never meant to be a cage. It was meant to be a convenience, a way to pass what we had built without dragging our son through a year of probate court. When Walter died, Gordon said the trust would have split the way most of these do. Walter's share settled into its own portion, but the rest, the part that held the Main Street building and the storefronts, and my own accounts, folded into what the documents call a survivor's trust. And that survivor's trust, Joan, is yours. You are the person who created it. You are the person it serves. And here is the part your son is counting on you never to learn. He set down his pen. As long as you are alive and of sound mind, that trust remains fully revocable by you and you alone. You can amend it. You can dissolve it. You can throw the whole thing out and write it again on a napkin if you want, provided you do it properly. A trustee does not own what is in the trust. A trustee only manages it on your behalf for your benefit, and a trustee can be removed by the person who made the trust. Any trustee, including your son. I sat very still. Outside, a truck downshifted on the highway and faded. I asked him what that meant for the papers Wes had made me sign. Gordon said Wes had almost certainly done two things. First, he had brought me a restatement, a full rewrite of the trust dressed up to look like routine housekeeping, and buried inside it were the lines that named himself the acting trustee and pushed me aside. Second, once he held that title on paper, he had signed a quitclaim deed as trustee, moving the hardware building out of the trust and into his own name. Gordon tapped the printout. That second move is the one that should sink him, he said. A trustee who transfers trust property to himself for nothing in return is not doing his job. He is robbing the very people he swore to protect. We have a name for it. Self-dealing, and courts do not forgive it lightly. But the restatement, I said. I signed the restatement. Does that not make it real? Gordon looked at me with something close to tenderness. It makes it a document, he said. It does not make it your will. If your signature was worked out of you while you were grieving and hurt and medicated without independent counsel, without a proper witnessing, then it can be challenged and undone. And more than that, Joan, you do not even have to prove all of that to a jury before you act. You are the settler, the maker. You have the standing to revoke that restatement yourself today with the stroke of a pen and restore the trust that you and Walter actually intended. He was not stealing a thing you could never get back. He was betting you would never find out you could take it back at all. I want to tell you what that did to me sitting in a vinyl booth with cold coffee going untouched between my hands. For a week I had felt like a woman standing in the rising water of her own house, watching the furniture float away, powerless to grab any of it. And Gordon had just handed me the deed to the water itself. The whole scheme, I understood then, did not rest on Wes's cleverness. It rested on my ignorance. He had not locked me out. He had only hoped I would never try the door. Gordon said there was more we would need to do it right. He could not simply take my word for what Walter and I had intended. We needed the original trust, the real one, the version before Wes rewrote it, to prove to a court what the true structure had been. I told him the red folder was empty, that every copy in the house was gone. He nodded, unsurprised, and said men like Wes always take the paper, because paper is what they think memory is made of. Then he asked almost gently whether Walter was the sort of man who kept only one copy of anything. And I laughed for the first time in days, a small, wet laugh, because no. Walter was not that man. Walter kept two of everything and hid the second one somewhere only he would think to look. He handed me a slip with a name and number as we stood to go. Claire Whitfield, he said. She is younger than me and twice as sharp, and she does nothing but trusts and estates and the ugly things families do to each other over them. If this has to become a fight, and I think it will, she is the one who fights it. Be discreet, Joan. Do not let Wes learn you have spoken to anyone. The moment he believes you are awake, he will move faster than we can. He walked me to my car, and before he shut the door, he said one more thing quietly. This is not your fault. No one raises a child expecting to need a lawyer against him. That is what makes it so cruel. I drove home, turning his words over like stones in my pocket. When I got there, I did not go inside. I went straight down the back steps to the old workshop behind the house, the one Walter built the year he retired from the store, the one that still smelled of sawdust and machine oil, and him. If he had hidden a second copy anywhere in this world, it would be here among the things he loved and understood. I searched for 2 hours. I went through the flat file where he kept his blueprints, the coffee tin of odd screws, the drawers of the workbench worn smooth by his hands. And then, kneeling on the concrete, I noticed that one square of the floor near the bench did not quite sit flush with the rest, and when I worked my fingers into the seam, a section lifted away a shallow box set into the slab lined with a scrap of old drop cloth. Inside was a fireproof pouch, and inside that a slim binder and a small flash drive, and on the drive in Walter's tight print on a strip of masking tape 2 words, Hilliard Ledger. I carried them up to the house like they were made of glass. Walter's old laptop was still in the bottom drawer of the roll-top desk, the charger wound in the same twine he wound everything in. It took its time, waking the screen flickering once before it caught, and I sat in his chair and pushed the drive into the side and held my breath. There were 3 folders. One said Trust, one said Correspondence, and one said Read Me First. I opened the first one. Inside were the scanned pages of the original Trust, the real one with our 2 names, and the structure Gordon had drawn for me on his yellow pad. Every building and every account, laid out the way Walter and I had actually meant them to pass. Nowhere in it did Wes hold the powers he had written for himself over the summer. There was the proof, the true shape of the thing waiting patiently in the floor for the day I would need it. The second folder held years of email printed and scanned between Walter and Gordon, and once or twice a lawyer I did not know. They were not cruel letters. They were worried ones. In a message from 3 years back, Walter had written that he loved his son, but did not trust his softness that Wes bent toward whoever leaned on him hardest, and that he feared what a stronger will might talk him into once his father was gone. If anything ever seems off after I am gone, Walter had written, remind Joan that the trust is hers to control, that she can undo what she did not mean to do, and that Gordon knows the structure. There it was again, the same instruction laid down years before I would ever need it, like a man setting out sandbags before a flood he could feel coming in his knees. Then I opened the last folder. Read Me First. There was only one file inside, and it was a video, and my hand hovered over it a long moment before I made myself click. Walter came onto the screen, sitting in the very chair I was sitting in this very room, and the sight of him took the breath clean out of me. He looked tired, the way he looked near the end, more lined than I let myself remember, but his voice when it came was steady and low, and entirely his own. If you are watching this, he said, then something has gone wrong, and I am sorry. I am not there to stand between you and it. I do not know when this will be. I do not know how it will come. But Joan, listen to me now the way you always made me listen to you. Our son is not an evil man. He is a weak one, and weakness is its own kind of danger because weak men get used by strong ones and call it loyalty. I have seen the way certain people lean on him. I hope I am wrong about where it leads. I have hoped that for years. But if he ever comes to you alone with papers, if he ever asks you to sign in a hurry, if anything at all feels even a little wrong, I need you to stop and trust the feeling. He leaned toward the camera, and his eyes found mine across all that distance and all that time. I built us protections, he said. The trust is yours, Joan. Yours to keep and yours to undo. Nothing anyone talks you into is final while you are still standing and still yourself. Gordon knows what to do. Ruth will stand beside you even before she understands why. And you, my girl, you have always been stronger than you give yourself the credit for. This house and that store, we raised them together out of nothing, board by board, season by season. Do not let anyone tear them down in my name. Whatever it costs you, do not let them. The screen went dark, and I sat in his chair in the quiet with my hand pressed to my mouth. It was not grief exactly, though grief was in it. It was the strange, aching relief of being seen. Even a year in the ground under the sugar maple, Walter had reached across and put his hand at the small of my back the way he used to when I stood too long at the sink. He had not built those protections because he distrusted our son. He had built them because he trusted me. I called Gordon that night. I told him I had it. The trust the letter's a video Walter left. His voice sharpened at once. Do not let that drive out of your sight, he said. Bring it to Claire and me in the morning. And Joan, he added a video of the settler stating his intent made years before any of this. That changes what kind of fight this is. I slept 4 hours, which was more than I had managed all week, and in the morning I sat across a wide table from Claire Whitfield while she and Gordon went through the drive page by page. She was younger than I expected, closer to my son's age than to mine, but there was a stillness in the way she read that told me she was very good at this. After a long while, she looked up and said the original trust plus the video made it nearly impossible for the restatement to stand. A court would want to know why a grieving injured widow had rewritten her entire estate alone with the one person who benefited, and that question answers itself. She was already reaching for a fresh legal pad. But it was Gordon who found the thing that turned my stomach. He had been studying the recorded quitclaim deed and the copy of the restatement, holding them side by side under the desk lamp, and he went very quiet. Then he asked me who had witnessed my signatures. I told him there had never been anyone in the room but Wes. He nodded slowly and pointed to the notary block stamped at the bottom of the deed, the seal that was supposed to mean I had appeared in person and sworn to my own signature before an officer of the state. Claire leaned in and read the name and the commission number, and her expression flattened into something cold and professional. She said she recognized the name. She said the man's notary commission had been revoked more than a year before the date stamped on my papers, which meant the seal on the document that stole my building had been placed by a person with no authority to place it at all. It was not just a lie. It was a forged formality on top of a forged consent, and it opened a door none of us had expected to find open. Because a deed sworn before a notary who no longer held a commission was not merely weak, Claire said. It suggested the whole thing had been assembled by someone who knew exactly which corners to cut and gambled that no one would ever check. She asked whether Wes had drafted these himself. I said I did not think he could have. My son could sell a snow shovel in July, but he had never in his life written a paragraph that read like law. Gordon and Claire exchanged a look, and Claire said the language was a lawyer's language, careful and practiced the work of someone with a bar card and a reason to stay in the shadows. His name came back to me before she finished the thought. Curtis Vance. Wes's roommate all 4 years of college, the friend who had drifted in and out of our kitchen for 2 decades, who had gone off to a small firm 1 county over and always shook Walter's hand a beat too long. Gordon's jaw tightened when I said it. He knew the firm. He had seen its name on the edges of other arrangements that never quite smelled right, and he said if Curtis Vance had drafted this, then Wes had not acted alone, and that changed the size of the thing considerably, because this was no longer only a family taking each other to civil court over money. Claire said the words plainly so I would not miss them. Working a signature out of a vulnerable older woman moving her property to yourself for nothing, sealing it with a dead notary commission in New Hampshire, that is not just something you undo. It is financial exploitation of an elder, and that is a crime the county attorney can charge, and the state's protective services can investigate. She was not saying it to frighten me. She was saying it so I would understand that the ground had shifted, that I was no longer a woman begging for scraps of her own life back, but a witness to something the law itself had an interest in. I drove home with all 3 folders in my purse and Walter's voice still in my ears, and for the first time since the phone rang in the dark, I did not feel like the water was rising. I felt like a woman who had just been handed by a husband a year gone, and a friend he chose for me before I ever needed one. The one thing my son had gambled everything on my never having. A pen of my own and the right to use it. No. The morning after I brought the folders to Claire, I woke before the sun and did not reach for the ceiling with my eyes the way I had all that terrible week. I lay still and listened to the house instead, the tick of the water heater, the wind working at the storm windows. Walter hung every October, and I understood that something in me had changed its posture. For a week I had been a woman things were done to. That morning I got up to be a woman who did things. Claire had been clear about the order of it when we sat together, and she had been clear that I would be the one to act, not her, not Gordon, not some faceless office moving papers on my behalf while I waited by the phone. She said that mattered, and not only for the law. She said a woman who signs her own name back onto her own life heals differently than one who watches a lawyer do it for her. I did not fully understand her then. I understand her now. The first thing I did at her conference table 2 days later with my reading glasses on and my hand steady. She slid a document across to me, and it was not a form Wes had brought me with a coffee and a smile. It was a revocation, plainly titled that undid the restatement my son had worked out of me over the spring, and restored the trust Walter and I had actually made the one that had waited in the workshop floor for the day I would need it. Claire walked me through every line the way Walter always told me a document should be walked through to the bottom out loud, no line skipped. When she finished, she set the pen down beside the page and did not touch it again. "This part is yours," she said. "No one can do it for you, and no one should." I read it once more on my own, and then I signed my full name, Joan Marie Hilliard, in the firm round hand my mother taught me at a kitchen table, 60 years gone, and I felt the letters go down into the paper like roots. With that one signature, Wes stopped being the trustee of anything. He had never owned the trust. He had only borrowed a title he tricked me into lending him, and I had just taken it back. Claire sent a certified copy of the revocation to the bank that same afternoon, with a letter on her firm's paper stating that the restatement was withdrawn, that I was the sole trustee of record once more, and that any activity on the accounts should be held pending their review. By the end of the week, the bank had done exactly that, placing the trust accounts under an internal hold while they confirmed the change, which meant that whatever Wes had been quietly drawing from them stopped drawing. But the building was the harder knot, and the building was the one Walter had loved most, because he had bought it with his own hands' work and hung the Hilliard Hardware sign himself on a January morning cold enough to crack the paint. Revoking the restatement fixed who ran the trust going forward. It did not on its own drag the building back out of Wes's name because Wes had already used his stolen title to sign that quitclaim deed transferring it to himself, and a recorded deed does not simply vanish because the man who signed it turned out to be a thief. For that, Claire said we would go to court and ask a judge to say plainly what was true, that the deed was void, that the property had never lawfully left the trust that it belonged, where Walter and I had always meant it to belong. She called the action a quiet title suit, a strange and gentle name for a thing that was about to be very loud. I signed the verified complaint myself, swearing to the facts of it, every visit and every folder and every page, and when the clerk stamped it, I asked Claire to do one more thing at the same moment. I asked her to record the notice. She had explained it to me twice because she wanted me to choose it with open eyes. When you file a suit that puts the ownership of a piece of property in question, you may record a notice in the county land records, a lis pendens, a small formal flag that tells the entire world a lawsuit is pending over that address. From the day it is recorded, anyone who looks any bank, any buyer, any title company, sees that the property is contested and that whoever takes it takes the fight along with it. It does not freeze the building in any dramatic way. It simply makes it impossible to pretend the building is clean. Claire warned me it would announce us. Wes would learn the day it hit the records that his mother was not asleep after all. But it would also chain the building to the truth until a judge could rule, and I told her to record it. I was done being quiet in the name of keeping the peace. There is a difference between peace and silence, and I had confused the two for a year. While the court paper moved, I did the other thing Claire and Gordon had both told me was not optional. I made the report. I sat in a small county office with a woman from the state's protective services, and I told her everything in order, and it was harder than any of the legal signing because saying it aloud to a stranger made it a fact about my son and not just a wound inside me. She was kind and unhurried, and she wrote it all down, and when I left, she told me the county attorney's office would be looking at the notary seal and the timing of the signatures, and that I had done the right and difficult thing by coming in. I cried a little in the car afterward, not from weakness, but because there is a grief in reporting your own child that no verdict ever pays back. Ruth came by most evenings through those weeks, sometimes with soup, sometimes with nothing but herself, and she sat at the kitchen table while I told her where things stood. I had not told her everything at first, on Gordon's advice, but there came a night when the papers were filed and the notice was recorded, and the thing was too large to carry alone. And I laid all of it out for her, the workshop floor, the video, Curtis Vance, the dead notary, seal, the revocation with my name on it. She listened without once interrupting her face, hardening detail by detail. And when I finished, she reached across and took my hand the way she had the first morning and said he groomed you plain and simple week after week, wearing your guard down while you grieved his father. I had known it in my bones for a while, but hearing Ruth say it out loud let me set it down. She stayed until the tea went cold, and before she left, she stood in the doorway and looked back at me and said, "Walter would be proud of you, Joan," and I had to turn to the sink so she would not see my face. The days grew shorter, and the maple in the yard went from struck match to bare, and Claire kept me informed as the machinery turned. Wes's celebration was coming, the public one, the party he had planned to throw 3 weeks after the small, quiet wedding, and it was going to be a production. He had rented the event hall out past the covered bridge, the pretty one people book for the photographs, and he had let the regional paper know about it because the paper was running a soft little feature on next-generation family business in the valley, and my son intended to be its smiling face. New leadership. A young man carrying his late father's legacy forward. That was the story he wanted told, and he had built a party to tell it. Claire and Gordon and I talked about the timing of the service, and I want to be honest about what it was and what it was not, because the truth of it matters more to me than the drama of it. No judge came to that party. No one froze anything in that hall while the band played. All of the real work had already happened in offices and land records and a courthouse clerk's stamp over the previous 3 weeks, quietly on paper the way these things actually happen. What was left was only the delivery the moment the complaint had to be formally placed into Wes's hands so that the case could proceed. And Claire's process server, a calm man who did this for a living, simply chose to do his job at a time and place he knew he would find Wes standing still. That was all. But sometimes all is enough. I did not go. That was never the point, and I want you to understand I felt no hunger to watch my son's face come apart. I stayed home. Ruth stayed with me. We sat in my kitchen with the good lamp on and a pot of tea between us, and I kept my phone face down on the table, and I waited, and the waiting was its own strange kind of prayer. Claire told me afterward how it went, and I have turned it over enough times that I can see it, though I was not there. The hall was full and warm and loud, with the particular brightness of people determined to have a wonderful time. There was a violinist tuning near the windows and waiters moving through with trays of pale wine, and near the entrance a photographer from the paper was crouched waiting for the shot of the young couple that would run above the headline. Wes was near the front in his good gray suit, and Curtis Vance was a few feet from him with a drink in his hand, playing the role of the loyal old friend, and for a few minutes, everything unfolded exactly as my son had designed it. Then a staff member touched Wes's elbow and murmured that a gentleman needed a word, and the calm man crossed the floor with a manila envelope and asked quietly and correctly whether he was Wes Hilliard. And when Wes said yes, he handed it over and said the words the law requires, and stepped back. Claire said Wes smiled at first out of reflex the way a man smiles when he thinks he is being handed a card or a gift. He opened it standing there with the party going on around him. She said his face did not change for a moment, and then it changed all at once. The color left it. He read and read again, and understood that the envelope held a lawsuit sworn to by his own mother, and that somewhere in the county records a small formal flag had been flying for days over the building he thought was his, telling every bank and every buyer in the world that its ownership was in dispute. Curtis Vance took the pages from Wes's hand and turned through the first few, and Claire said the lawyer's face went even paler than my son's, because Curtis understood faster than Wes did exactly what a court was about to be shown. There was no scene. There was no shouting. There was only a young man standing very still in the middle of his own party while the meaning of it arrived. And then he leaned in and said something low to his friend and slipped out a side door with his tie loosening, and there was no speech and no toast and no photograph above any headline. Ruth was refilling my cup when the phone lit up on the table, and I turned it over and read Claire's message, which was only 2 words. "It is served." I set the phone back down and looked out the dark window toward the shape of the maple, and I did not feel triumphant, and I did not feel cruel. I felt the way you feel when a long fever finally breaks and you realize you are simply tired and simply alive. I thought that was the shape of it. The revocation, the suit, the notice, the service, and then a long, slow grind through the courts. I did not know there was one more thing under the surface. One more thing Wes had done that the Lispendens was about to drag up into the light. Claire called 2 days later, and there was something careful in her voice. She said the notice we recorded on the building had done more than warn the world. It had knocked over something Wes had stood up in secret and hoped to walk away from before anyone looked. She had it now from the title company which had come to her the moment their search turned up the flag. Wes, it turned out, had not stolen the building to keep it. He had stolen it to sell it. While he held it in his own name on paper using the very deed his dead notary had sealed, he had quietly put the Main Street building under contract to a development company out of the southern part of the state, one of the outfits buying up old downtowns to gut them into short-term rentals for the leaf season crowds. The sale was set to close within days of the wedding. The plan, Claire said, was almost elegant in its cruelty. Mary sell the building out from under his mother for cash, and be gone with the money before the woman he had erased ever thought to check the records. He would have walked away with the price of 40 years of his father's work in his pocket, and a new life bought with it. But you cannot sell a building the world has been warned about. The instant the Lispendens hit the records, the title company could not insure the sale, and no honest buyer closes on a property they cannot get clean title to, and the development company's lawyers read the flag and pulled out within the day. The contract collapsed, and in collapsing it did something my quiet suit alone might never have done. It laid the whole scheme bare. A man does not rush to sell a building he has held for 2 decades. A man rushes to sell a building he has just taken and needs to convert to cash before the taking is noticed. The sale contract dated and signed was the confession Wes never meant to write. It turned the picture from a son who had overreached into a man who had planned from the first folder in the first spring afternoon to strip his mother bare and vanish. Claire said the county attorney's office had asked for a copy of the contract, and that Curtis Vance had quietly withdrawn from representing his old friend, and that a complaint about the drafting and the notary had gone to the state bar. Whatever came next for the two of them, it was no longer a family disagreement about money. It was a matter the state had taken an interest in, and neither of them held the pen anymore. I sat with that a long while after Claire hung up. I thought about the boy who used to line up cereal boxes on the kitchen floor to build cities, who cried the year his father first got sick, who once called me long distance from a work trip for no reason but to hear me say goodnight. That boy had been real. I had not imagined him. But he was gone, and had been gone longer than I let myself know, and the man who wore his face had sat at my table with a coffee in his hand and planned to sell the roof over my head and leave before I woke. Both things were true. That is the part no one warns you about. You do not stop loving the child. You only stop being able to reach him, and eventually you stop reaching not out of anger, but because your hand comes back empty every time, and there is only so long a person can go on grasping at air. The case did not end that week or that month. These things do not end the way a story ends. But the tide had turned all the way over, and everyone in it knew. With the original trust proven, and the video of Walter stating plainly what he had intended, and a notary seal that had no right to exist, and a rushed secret sale that read like a signed admission, there was no version of events Wes could put in front of a judge that would hold. Claire told me the deed would be undone, the building restored to the trust, the accounts returned to my control, and that the harder questions, the criminal ones, would be answered by other offices in their own time. I signed what needed signing as it came, and my hand no longer shook when I did it. There came a morning a few weeks on when the phone rang early, and I knew before I lifted it who it would be. Wes's voice had lost the flat confidence he had wrapped around every word the night he called to say goodbye. He did not say hello. He said he did not understand why I was doing this to him. He said I had misunderstood his intentions. He said I had embarrassed him in front of the whole valley. And then near the end, in a smaller voice, he said he missed me. He did not apologize. Not once, not for anything. But he said he missed me, as though that were a thing I owed him a door for. I did not call back. I stood at the window instead and watched a single chickadee working the bare branches of the maple, its small chest puffed against the cold, going about the ordinary business of the morning as if nothing in the world had shifted overnight. I let the voicemail sit. Later I played it once more, and then I printed it out, the transcript of it, and I folded it once and tucked it into the back of Walter's old ledger in the same place I had begun keeping the pages that taught me what silence can hide. Then I closed the book. Ruth came by that afternoon, and I told her about the call, the way he had circled all the way around regret, without ever once stepping into it, and she stirred her tea and said what I already knew. Some people only ever come close to being sorry. They never quite arrive. I nodded, and the steam rose between us like a veil between the woman I had been in September and the woman I was becoming as the year turned. I spent the following weeks closing the doors Wes had left standing open. I called the utility companies and the insurance office and the town clerk, and I corrected every record that had been quietly moved into his name over the spring, and each call left my hand a little steadier than the last. Gordon helped me go through the accounts one by one until every dollar sat where it belonged in the trust under my name, doing nothing more dramatic than waiting to be useful. The building came home to the trust in the records, the Hilliard Hardware sign still faded on its brick face, and one afternoon I drove downtown and simply stood on the sidewalk in front of it in the thin November light. The shop had been closed since the year before Walter died, when his hands got too unsteady to make change, and neither of us had the heart to hire it out to a stranger, and the windows were papered over now. But through a gap in the paper I could still see the long wooden counter he had built himself, and the pegboard wall where the tools used to hang in their painted outlines, each one traced so a boy could learn to put it back in its place. Wes had learned to count on that counter. He had learned to make change there on Saturday mornings, standing on an upturned milk crate to reach the register, and Walter had been so proud of him, it embarrassed the boy. I stood there a long while with my hand flat against the cold storefront glass, and let myself remember the good version of my son, without letting it soften what the grown one had done, because I had learned by then that you can hold both the boy on the milk crate and the man at the side door, and that holding both is not weakness. It is only the truth. Then I told Walter out loud quietly that it was safe that I had it, that no one was going to gut it into rentals for people who would never know his name. I do not know if the dead hear us, but I know it steadied me to say it, and I know I drove home lighter than I came. One evening near the end of it all, I sat down at Walter's roll-top desk with the manila folder Claire had given me, the one that held the current version of my own will, and the trust as it now stood, and I opened it beside Walter's leather planner. His handwriting on the planner's cover still tightened my throat. For years since Walter passed, the documents had left everything to Wes without conditions, without a second thought, the way a mother's papers naturally do. I looked at my own signature at the bottom of that old page for a long moment, and then I slid it aside and asked Claire to help me write a new one. This time my son's name did not appear. Not as a beneficiary, not as a trustee, not in a footnote or a line of contingency. I did not do it in anger, and I made Claire write in the document itself a clause that no one of my blood could ever contest the new plan, not because I wanted a last word, but because I wanted the thing to hold. And in Wes's place, I wrote something Walter would have grumbled at for its formality and then loved in secret. I established a fund. I called it the Walter Hilliard Main Street Fund, and I built it to do the one thing Walter believed in more than any other, which was that a person should never have to depend on anyone else's mercy for a roof or a trade. The fund would help women past the age of 60, women who had spent their lives keeping shops and raising children and holding families together without ever quite owning the ground under their own feet, to open a small business of their own, or to keep one from closing, or to learn a trade with their own two hands. Bookkeeping and welding and small engine repair and the running of a hardware counter, the practical unglamorous skills Walter thought every grown person ought to have, and so few women of my generation were ever given the chance to learn. Claire and I spent an afternoon working out how it would actually run, because Walter would have wanted the thing to be practical and not just a pretty name on a letterhead. We wrote it so that there were no essays to compose and no committee of strangers to plead your hardship to, because I had watched too many proud women my age turn away from help that asked them to grovel for it first. A woman would need only to show that she was past 60 and serious enrolled or ready to enroll, committed to the work. The fund would cover tuition and tools and the plain ordinary things that quietly stop people at the door, the fee for a license exam, the gas to drive to a program 2 towns over, the work boots that cost a week's grocery money. Walter used to say that the difference between a person who makes it and a person who does not is almost never talent, and almost always whether someone covered the small thing at the exact moment it would have stopped them cold. I built the fund to be that someone. I named Ruth as the point of contact for it because she had earned that trust 10 times over, and I made sure Claire and Gordon held copies of everything. Every file, every recording, every page from the workshop floor, so that what Walter built and what I chose could never again be quietly rewritten by anyone in a spring afternoon. And then I signed it, Joan Marie Hilliard, my roots going down into the paper once more. And just like that, the inheritance my son had schemed and lied and forged to seize simply ceased to exist for him. There was nothing left to steal. I had given it a better home. That night I slept 7 hours without waking, which I had not done since the phone rang in the dark, and it was not the sleep of a woman who has won something. It was the sleep of a woman who has set a heavy thing down at last. Winter came on properly. After that, the real Monadnock cold, and the case ground forward in offices I did not have to sit in. Some weeks later, Claire stood in a small conference room in the county seat and presented the fund to a room of nonprofit directors and educators because I had asked her to be its public voice, since I had no wish to stand at a podium and turn my grief into a speech. She did it beautifully. She did not tell the room about betrayal or forged seals or a son slipping out a side door. She told them about a man who believed self-reliance was a kind of love, and a woman who chose when she had every reason to close her hands and retreat to open them instead. She said the fund honored both of them, and when she read the name aloud, the Walter Hilliard Main Street Fund, the room went quiet for a moment before the applause came slow and then steady, the way applause comes when people understand what a thing cost. I stayed at the back until the last cup of coffee was poured and the folding tables were being stacked, and as I gathered my coat, a woman about my own age came up to me, silver-haired with the strong, scarred hands of someone who has worked with them all her life. She said softly that she had taken a welding course at 48 and had dreamed for years of going back for her certification, but had never once been able to spare the money. She did not ask me for anything. She only wanted to say thank you. I held her gaze and told her the truth as I had come to understand it. "This is not charity," I said. "This is a hand at the small of your back steadying you while you take the next step yourself." She squeezed my arm and went out into the cold, and I stood there a while longer with my coat half on, feeling Walter beside me the way I sometimes still do, one hand resting light against my spine. The first snow came the week the inaugural grants went out. 3 women received them that year. One was going for her electrician's license, one into a metalworking program, and one, a widow like me, into a course in running the books for a small shop she meant to reopen in a downtown 2 valleys over. I did not know their whole stories, and they did not know mine, did not know what had brought the fund into being, only that it existed and that it had found them. A thank you note came 3 signatures, 3 different hands, 3 different dreams, and I stood on the porch reading it with the paper trembling a little in the wind. And for a moment I could feel my husband standing behind me, the way he used to stand behind me at the sink. And I understood that the future had reshaped itself, not cleanly, not without loss, but with purpose, which is the most any of us can ask of it. Wes wrote me one more time an email with no subject line, a single sentence. "So this is how it ends then. You will not even answer." I read it several times, and my hand hovered over the keys, and no words came because there were none left that would reach him, and I had finally stopped throwing them into the dark. I printed it and folded it once and tucked it into the back of the ledger with the rest, and I closed the book, and this time I did not open it again. People ask me sometimes, the few who know the whole of it, whether I forgive him. It is a harder question than it sounds, and I have stopped pretending it has a clean answer. Forgiveness, the way most people mean it, is a door you open to let someone walk back in, and that door I have closed and do not intend to open, not out of hatred, but because I have learned what walks through it when I do. But there is another kind quieter that has nothing to do with letting anyone back in. It is the kind where you simply set the weight of it down off your own chest, where you stop carrying the injury around like a stone in your coat, warming it with your body, keeping it alive. That kind I am working toward slowly some mornings better than others. I do not carry it for his sake. I carry it for mine, and then when I can, I set it down for mine too. That is the only forgiveness I have found that a person can actually live inside. I want to tell you what I learned in case you are carrying something like it, because I suspect some of you are. I learned that there is a difference between peace and silence, and that I had spent a year mistaking one for the other, keeping quiet and calling it keeping the peace, while my whole life was carried off a page at a time. Real peace is not the absence of a fight. Sometimes it is what you find on the far side of the one you were most afraid to have. I learned that a document is only as strong as the truth under it, and that a woman who reads to the bottom of the page the way my husband told me 1,000 times to do is far harder to erase than anyone counting on her exhaustion will ever expect. And I learned that you can love a child completely and still refuse to let him take you apart. That stepping back from someone is not always an act of anger, that sometimes it is the last clear act of love left to you, the choice to save yourself when you can no longer save them. I did not cut my son out of my life to punish him. I stepped back far enough at last to see him plainly, and then I chose peace over proximity, and I have never once been sorry for it. The house is mine in the records and in every board Walter and I ever nailed into place. I decide who walks through the door. And on the quiet mornings now, when the light comes up gray over the maple and the kettle begins its low hum on the stove, I stand at the window with a cup of black coffee, made the way he liked it, and the house around me is only still, no longer waiting, no longer holding its breath. And that stillness is not loneliness. It is the sound of a life that belongs once more, and for good, to the woman living it. If this reminded you of a moment when you had to reclaim your own voice, your own peace, or your own worth, then know that you are not the only one. There are more of us than you would think, quiet women who were underestimated one time too many and finally chose themselves. If it meant something to you, stay a while and let the next woman who needs to hear it find her way here too.